Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining this afternoon's program. I know that you're going to enjoy it so much. I hope you had a chance to see the video this morning or all day. You could have watched it from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m., Far East, Deep South. We are very fortunate that we actually have 5 copies of the video in our system, and you can put a hold on them and pick them up at one of our locations. So today's program is part of the Pasadena Public Library's Asian American and Pacific Islander History Month. So before we get started, we have a lot of people that are still connecting to audio. So for optimal viewing enjoyment, if you could please mute yourself, then everyone will have the opportunity to hear the program in the best way. Also, Larissa and Baldwin have agreed to have us record the program, and it will be on YouTube Pasadena Library. No one's face or name will be shown except for Larissa Lamb and Baldwin Chiu. So we still have some people that are coming in. So it looks like everybody's had a chance to pretty much get connected to audio. I'm going to introduce and welcome the program, then ask some questions with Larissa and Baldwin. We'll have a conversation. So if you have any questions, if you could please put them in chat. Questions are private with me, and I will ask your questions, because I'm sure you have lots of questions from this wonderful video that you saw today. So, the Pasadena Public Library is recognizing the contributions and influence of Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders to the history, culture, and achievements of the United States, with a series of virtual programs, events, and activities for all ages during the month of May. And of course, as you know, it is more important than ever to celebrate all of these accomplishments. All of the programs for Asian American Pacific Islander Month are sponsored by the Pasadena Friends of the Library. I do know that all of you join all of us at the library Saturday to learn about the devastating news of Pasadena Central Library closing for seismic retrofit requirements. Our branch libraries have opened for additional hours. And that's how, if you would like to check out a video, you can go into our catalog and put a hold on it and pick it up at one of the libraries. So why was May picked as Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month? Well, it was to commemorate the immigration of the first Chinese woman to the U.S., Afong Moy, in 1834. The first Japanese to the United States on May 7th, 1843, and to mark the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad on May 10th, 1869. So some of you probably, if you read the Pasadena Weekly, have seen this wonderful article and the beautiful picture of Larissa. Larissa and Baldwin are husband and wife, and they live here in Pasadena. They have a daughter who goes to Pasadena Unified Schools. So I hope you've had a chance to read this article in Pasadena Weekly. So let me tell you a little bit about Larissa Lamb. She's a director of the award-winning documentary Far East, Deep South. Over the past 2 decades, Larissa has been a creative force in music, film, and TV. A proud UCLA Bruin from Diamond Bar, she's been a keynote speaker at TEDx and LeaderCast. She's been a contributing author to the LA Times and Asian American anthology books such as Miso for Life. She's an award-winning singer, songwriter, and composer. Larissa's song, I Feel Alive, won a Hollywood Music and a Media Award, and she has written music for film and TV shows like The Oprah Winfrey Show. She's also an experienced TV radio host who currently hosts the podcast Love, discovery, and dim sum that helps people discover more history and an Asian American perspective on race and culture alongside her husband, Baldwin Chiu. So Baldwin and his family are the subjects of the Deep South, the Far East Deep South video. His family story has been featured on NBC News, PBS, and NPR. He's a graduate of the Act One film producing program and previously produced the award-winning documentary short, Finding Cleveland. In addition to being a producer, Chiu is a rapper and beatboxer known by his MC name Only One, and has gained recognition for his viral videos, Cantonese Boy, 12 Days of Dim Sum, and Asian Americans Make History. His original panels addressing race, immigration, and Asian American representatives have been in the media, and he's been a numerous speaker on these various subjects for everyone. So I think the film, if you've not had a chance to see it, I highly recommend that you check out the video from the library. The Far East Deep South tells the story of a Chinese American family who, in researching their roots, are surprised to discover that their family history does not lead them back to China, but rather through Mississippi. Their investigation uncovers many surprising revelations about not only their family history, but the history of the Chinese in the American South. Highlighted are the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, how the Depression has affected the Chinese community, and the relationship of the Chinese community in the South in this video with the African American community. So now at this time, we're just thrilled to be welcoming Larissa and Baldwin to talk about their film, Far East Deep South. Welcome to Pasadena Public Library.
Hey,
Thank you.
It's good to be here.
We live so close, yet we're so far
I know,
virtually.
we could walk there, but
But we're so glad to have the space, and thank you for inviting us and for supporting our film.
So we actually showed your first film,
Finding Cleveland, that's right.
In real life.
In real life.
In your
real life at the library.
In your theater.
In your beautiful theater there.
Beautiful Donald Wright Auditorium, and you brought your daughter regularly to the library. That's how I actually met you.
That's right.
Thank you so much. So I know you started researching this film because of your family history, but can you give us a little more background of what inspired you to make the Far East Deep South? How did you realize you had all this family history, or through your research you discovered it?
Well, I mean, we really started with that first film that we showed at the library, Finding Cleveland. I mean, that first trip was just one day on that short documentary, and we weren't even planning on making a film. It was supposed to be just a home video, really.
Yeah, you go on vacation with your family and you think, we're just going to keep this for our own record. Our daughter's 1 year old, like any good parents, we're rolling camera the whole time to capture all her precious moments with grandpa and grandma. And little did we know we would stumble into a museum in the middle of Mississippi and discover all these Chinese families and their artifacts and their stories. And for me, being a native Californian, Baldwin's a native Northern California. I'm a native Southern Californian.
So you're from the South too.
I'm from the South, Southern California.
Southern California.
That was surprising to us because we didn't learn this in history growing up. And I just was floored the fact that when I think of America and I think of like just Americana and all that, I think of like the American South as an Asian American. And I was like, well, I didn't know there were Chinese there too. And so for me, that was a big story that I wanted more people to know, is that there was a population, many generations that lived and worked and died in the South, and were subject to the same Jim Crow laws that other communities of color were subject to. So there was this rich history. But as we kept digging, we ended up uncovering more, and so we did not know what we were doing. honestly, at the beginning.
Well, you certainly had a wonderful result, and it is a very, very emotional, beautiful, beautiful film. So, in addition to trying to find all the information, what challenges did you have, and who actually helped you the most along the way? Or what was your first big break?
I think connecting with people was one of the challenges, and we were very fortunate that on our first trip we met Emily Jones, and then
Well, backing it up a little bit, Baldwin's brother Edwin
oh
is
yeah,
the one who kind of instigated the trip. He and his wife had suggested that his parents take a trip out to a little pilgrimage out to Mississippi to visit their grandfather's gravesite for the 40th anniversary. And Edwin decided he was a big fan of Parks and Recreation. And I also bring that up because, our city hall in Pasadena was like the face of Pawnee, Indiana in that show. And so he just thought like, oh, there must be somebody like Leslie Knope, if anybody's watched the TV show, somebody who knows everything about like the city of Cleveland, Mississippi. So he called City Hall. And I don't know if somebody calls Pasadena City Hall, if they get a response like that quickly, but he was able to get somebody to respond to him, and somebody told him about the museum.
yeah.
And even the cemetery. So
Yeah, and then people started coming out of the woodworks. Emily Emerald Dunn, who you met in the film, she ended up doing a lot of the background research for us while she was in Mississippi. So she was kind of our go-to person when we came back here to California and Pasadena. We needed some like ears on the ears on the street.
And as you can kind of imagine, in smaller towns and in the South, a lot of people just know each other. Everybody knows somebody whose cousin's related to somebody else. So
Yeah.
And they all still live there. That was something that was really wonderful. Their family roots were still there.
some of them
Some of
were.
them.
And we actually found some people here in LA that had that were originally from the Mississippi Delta. In fact, there was one person in particular who I had known since birth, because he's semi distantly related to me by marriage. I didn't even know he was from Cleveland, Mississippi, until somebody else from the South said like, hey, you should talk to this person. He's in LA. We're like, really? So we always say the Mississippi Delta Chinese, some have stayed in the South, but the majority of them have moved to other parts of the country, and they live among us.
Yeah, and he ended up connecting us back to his friend who was also born and raised in Cleveland, Mississippi, Happy M, who you saw in the film. So, and he was also no longer in Mississippi, but so we had two people from Mississippi that were connected through LA and the East Coast. But yeah.
Oh, it just shows how small the world is when you do this and tracking down. This is kind of just like roots, to go back and keep digging and digging, and you just don't know what you're going to come up with. How did you decide to include the relationship between the Black, African American, and Chinese community? It's a very important relationship.
Yeah, I think part of it was when we found out that the Chinese were also subject to Jim Crow laws, and they were also not allowed to live in white neighborhoods. They were forced to live in the same neighborhoods as the Black community, and so that's where they were the only places they could have their businesses. There was the only places they could live, and so it was natural for us to ask the question. It's like, oh, so what was that dynamic like? So that was something that we really wanted to whether we got a favorable or not favorable answer, we were really interested in investigating. And to our surprise, unlike sometimes the tensions we have in LA between Asian and Black communities, there was a very respectful relationship.
Yeah, and plus we were hearing on our first trip when we did Finding Cleveland, we heard these stories of these relationships, but we didn't hear it from the Black community. We heard it from the white and the Chinese community. And when we made Far East Deep South, we felt like, we really need to hear it from that community. We need to know from their voices what that experience was like. And hopefully we can compare it with what we knew from the other communities. But we felt like that was the most accurate way for us to really understand that relationship. And clearly there was a relationship. So there's no way we could have made the film without including that very important part of it.
Right, because in the film you showed the fact of the Chinese extended financial help to the African Americans, so that when they worked in the fields, they only got paid once a year, and that was very, very helpful. to them, and they really became a good partnership, those two
Yeah.
different communities. And also, as you said, the Chinese couldn't go to the white schools, so they were just kind of the middle people between the whites and the blacks.
Yeah, and what we've also just learned is firsthand from some of the Mississippi Delta Chinese that we've become friends with is just, the Chinese often were also excluded from getting haircuts, at establishments, getting medical services they were denied. And even when we also learned in doing more research is that the plantation owners were jacking up the prices for the sharecroppers, both Chinese and black sharecroppers initially. And so that was one of, I think, the impetus for the Chinese community to move into some of the grocery stores, is that they offered a more competitive and a safer environment for communities of color.
Yeah, and then we also learned after we made the film a little bit more about how how the black community would also help the Chinese community by partnering with them also, because I mean they were you'd wonder like how do the Chinese stores even make it? It's not like running a business today where you have all these benefits of small business ownership. It was a very tough way to run a business, and it was to make a living. So there should have been, there were other ways that the communities needed to help each other, whether it's from the Chinese community or other communities. And we learned about partnerships that, the black community and the Chinese community had, kind of underground, working on the farm, where you see a photo on the poster of this African-American gentleman that we had no idea who he was, but we knew he was significant. And we didn't find out until we were done with the film that his name is Hosey Collins.
His photo was among your other family photos that your dad inherited.
Right. And so we knew that since we had a photo of him, he must have been special. Right. And we found out that they helped each other. He worked in the store with my grandfather, and my grandfather would help him out on his farm. And, they would just help each other make ends meet. And it was a very symbiotic relationship where both, they had relationship with each other. They trusted each other. And, back then photos were very expensive. So for him to personally take a photo of this person, it's like, wow, he was significant in their family.
Right. Well, you showed the wonderful scrapbooks in the photo albums in the film. So they were quite a collection of pictures in those photo albums. And so if they were expensive, that was really quite something to have that photo album.
Yeah, definitely not like today where you're taking 1 million pictures a day and you're like swiping and deleting and swiping and deleting. It's like if you're gonna take a photo back then, you're thinking about what you're gonna dress up.
We had to hear like it takes like several seconds, like to like everybody had to hold still, right, for those old cameras to function. Like you couldn't.
Yeah, you're not taking selfies with a bed head. You're gonna get dressed, right? Whether or not it's your car or not, or your best Sunday digs. Whenever you're always gonna try to look your best if you're gonna take a photo of yourself. That's gonna last forever.
So that was your father's father that was in that photo standing by, he's dressed up standing by the car.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's Baldwin's grandfather. Yes.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
So what a wonderful thing when you ran into Emily and you found the museum and you realized everything in there. And I thought it was so poignant when you actually found the Bible. So can you tell us how the Bible came, and do you have the Bible now or anything to do about the Bible?
Yeah, that was definitely a major find. It was a very significant discovery. We do now own the Bible. The museum and the family that found it, it was actually the Dunn family that turned in the Bible to the museum. They found the Bible.
The Dunns were the ones who bought Baldwin's grandfather's store.
And the Bible was left over at the store when they bought it, and they turned it over to the museum, but they still maintained ownership of it. And then they eventually gave us the Bible back. So we own it now.
And it's on loan at the Mississippi Delta Chinese Heritage Museum in Cleveland, Mississippi right now.
So they can curate it and they can take care of it.
Yeah, originally in a non-COVID world, we were planning to do like a traveling exhibit possibly with the Bible and other artifacts from the museum, but those plans will have to be a little bit postponed, but we do hope to like do a traveling museum exhibit someday with the Bible and the museum.
So were there other items found in the Dunn store that the Dunn family bought your family's store? Did they find other items of interest or other family items?
Yeah,
Yeah.
we didn't find this out till like much later, but I think as they've been cleaning out their attic and everything, they keep uncovering stuff. And now that they know, who we are, anytime they see something that's labeled Casey Lou, Baldwin's grandfather's name, they immediately like call us. But
Yeah, I mean, there's other books that he had in his little collection, and we found a really cool keychain, which is we wish we could have found a way to put it into the film, but man, it's gonna make me it's gonna make me
you want me
cry.
to tell the story?
I'll try.
Okay.
So they found the keys to the old store. So you saw in the film the store isn't there anymore. They tore it down.
Right.
Um, but they still had the keys to the front door, and the keychain said, "If found, return to KC Lou." And I was like,
Oh, wow.
"Oh wow!" So Emerald Dunn found it in their attic,
And I
and
think it's like a brass keychain. So
yeah, so it's a very
it's like
it looks old and,
it's in
antiquitous,
mhm.
but it's definitely engraved with it. If found, return to Casey Lou, and she returned it to me, and I gave it to my dad. So in essence, she did return. She found the keys and she returned it to our family.
Oh,
So
oh, what a wonderful memory. How
yeah,
special. So your grandfather's store is no longer there, but the Dunn's family purchased the store, correct? And
right.
They did, and they don't own it anymore either.
no, but then
Yeah.
they don't own it anymore, but they collected all of these artifacts and passed them down in the family. So the family took care of them. So that,
Yeah.
which is very nice too, because they could have just got lost along the way.
Right.
Yeah.
Apparently, their father, J.W. Dunn, who was the one that was good friends with Baldwin's grandfather, Casey Lou, he was a bit of a pack rat. And not only
Oh,
was he a pack rat, he was very like sentimental.
Sentimental. Yeah.
So he kept all these belongings for his close friends, which is why the letter was there and the keychain. And I think
The
the
letterhead.
things, the
Yeah.
letterhead from the store, I think things that were significant, he kept. And we're so grateful to J.W. Dunn for being a sentimental guy.
Yeah.
well, that's very, very fortunate. So can you talk a little bit about the Chinese Exclusion Act? Because some people that are listening today might not know actually what it is from 1882.
Yeah, well, the Chinese Exclusion Act was passed in 1882, and I believe the anniversary of that it was also in May. I think it was May 6th, I believe.
So
That
yes.
President Chester Arthur signed it into law, and it's the first and only race-based policy for immigration where it prohibited a whole group of people based on race. So you could be Chinese but be born in Singapore, in Africa, in Australia, but as long as you tried to come into you would not be allowed to come into the country, or if you were already in the country, you could not become a citizen. And so and really it was like the beginning of our kind of restrictive immigration system that we even see today. And so
It was started off because of the Transcontinental Railroad. The Chinese helped build the Transcontinental Railroad, and then there was some animosity towards them because they did such a great job, and there was a contest, and the Chinese built the railroads faster and quicker and cheaper. And so eventually, unfortunately, the Irish, who were also building the railroad, they petitioned the government to enact this Chinese Exclusion Act, to say, hey, it's unfair competition, and
and they really were just trying to get rid of the Chinese and eliminate the competition. And so it was enacted in 1882 and was not repealed until 1943, when the United States needed China as an ally for World War II. But the full effects of it really weren't lifted until 1965 with the passage of the Nationality and Immigration Act.
Yeah, so unfortunately, what you see in the film is that there were repercussions and consequences to the Chinese Exclusion Act. It wasn't just a law that was back in the 1800s that's no longer relevant. It was actually a law that actually started its structure before 1882 that led to it and continued even after its repulsion. And my family is just one of thousands of families that had generational trauma and had families separated as a direct consequence to the Chinese Exclusion Act. So it's an unfortunate thing that happened in our country, and there were consequences to it.
Right. So eventually, then some of your relatives and family came after the Exclusion Act. Didn't it say in the film in the 1930s or so, and they went through Angel Island?
Well, the Exclusion Act was still in play by then. It was because it didn't start getting being repealed until 1943. So the Chinese Exclusion Act was still in effect in that time.
So the relatives that we show in the film, so Baldwin's great grandfather was able to he was in the country.
Well, they saw the film.
If you've seen the film, yes, he was in the country already, and so because he was a citizen, he was a merchant. That was an exemption. You couldn't come into the country if you were a laborer, because that's who they were trying to get to it. So their exemption was a merchant, because they thought, like, most Chinese don't have the money to start their own business, so there's no way they can stay or they can come. So Baldwin's great grandfather was able to eventually bring his great grandmother, who's the one with bound feet that you saw in the film, and eventually Baldwin's grandfather, their son.
It took 17 years, though.
It took a while. It took a while for them to get them in. And then I think his father couldn't come because, again, of the restrictions. I think eventually, down the line, had Baldwin's grandfather survived, there was already things in motion to try to get Baldwin's dad in when he was older. But, he, unfortunately, his grandfather passed away before he could actually be reunited with his son, which added to the tragedy of it all.
Oh, yes, huge tragedy. So tell us about going to the cemetery. That was a very emotional day for your family, and beautiful headstones. Now, were those there, or did the family add those later? Or
as far as I understand, that's original. I don't think.
Yeah, from what I understood, they were not made.
one.
So to kind of clarify that, so the cemetery that Baldwin's grandfather and great grandfather are buried in is the New Cleveland Cemetery, and it started out as a white cemetery. We also show that there was a Chinese cemetery, which is in Greenville, or there's actually technically two.
Mm-hmm.
We just mentioned it once, just not to confuse people, and that was the Chinese cemetery was the segregated cemetery that in the earlier Chinese were forced to be buried in, because they could not be buried in white or black cemeteries. They had to be buried in their own cemetery. So from what Baldwin's father heard through his grandmother, and we kind of mentioned this in the film, is that his great grandfather may have been one of the first Chinese to be buried in a white cemetery, and that would
area.
Yeah,
right.
in that area. That would have been like about 1939. Yeah.
Okay, so you also went to the National Archives, and what did you find there? I mean, because you unearthed a lot of other things there.
Yeah.
How did you get there? Or going to Angels Island, did that lead you to go to the National Archives, or just as researchers?
It's interesting. We didn't even know these exclusion files existed until we were touring with our Finding Cleveland short film, and we were in New York one day, and at a screening, and during the Q&A session, somebody asked us if we had seen the Baldwin's family's Chinese exclusion files, and we said,
What are those?
What are those? And so the woman explained, like, anyone that was Chinese that came into the country or left the country during the Chinese Exclusion Act would have a file on them, because the immigration officers were kept interrogations, and
they really were called interrogations. It's not just something we made up, but they actually say it on the forms, interrogation.
Where they had transcripts of just questions, like pages and pages of questions they would ask the Chinese when they're leaving and when they were coming back, just to make sure that they were allowed to be in the country, and customs documents and ship manifests and all that. What we didn't know. And so, and then they said, oh yeah, there was one in San Bruno, near San Francisco. If your family came through Angel Island, your records are probably there, which was, again, huge news to us, because Baldwin was born in San Francisco, grew up in the Bay Area. And he's like, so we went all the way from California to Mississippi, and then we're traveling around the country. We end up in New York, only to find out that we should go back to San Francisco to look for stuff.
To go back where we came from.
Yeah. And I mean, you're a librarian, so you're probably much more, well-versed in all the archives that our government has. But, we had no idea that our government kept records, and we didn't realize the National Archives is basically like a giant library that the government keeps of stuff. So the immigration records were there.
Yeah, and we were really surprised to find it. The first time we contacted them, they said, nope, can't find anything. and they say like, we looked under this and this and we couldn't find anything, and I had to like correct them. I was like, oh, I think you got this thing wrong, the spelling, flip this around, change these dates. And then they did another search, what the researcher did, and they were like, oh, we found 3 files. And we're like, what?
So yeah, if you're looking for family files, it doesn't even matter what country of origin you're from. Know that the customs officers often misspell things, so you have to use all sorts of alternate spellings and mix around different words, especially with Chinese names.
Especially on first name, last name, family name.
You talked about that in the film.
Yeah.
The last name and the
right.
And they found them. Maybe even the birth dates. Did you notice that any of the dates were changed? The
dates were a little off because I think the Chinese calendar, the lunar calendar is the calculation was a little different. So some of the years varied a little bit. Yeah, so they even on the documents it didn't say like 1902 or something like that. It was like KS something number and something dot something, and it was an imperial system of calculating. Depending on which dynasty it was referencing that. So the archives actually had a book to help us decode that time frame.
Oh, well, that was very helpful.
Yeah. It took her a while to find that book though, but she was able to help. She was like, oh yeah, I don't know what those dates mean. And she did a little research and found the book and translated the dates for us.
They're very helpful, all of this. So are there other places that you need to go to research when you've stumbled upon some of these different places? Do you think there's other places out there, more in San Francisco or where, because there's a big Chinatown in San Francisco and a big Chinatown in New York.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's some family associations, and there's one for like different family last names. So there is a Chiu family association that we went to go visit in San Francisco. We didn't end up yielding any specific information about his family, but we did learn some things in general, about the people that came from most likely the same village, right? Like Senwui, or Xinghui, if you speak Mandarin, is the name of the village that Baldwin's family is from. And, we learned that there's kind of an order to names for each generation, and there was a support system with a lot of the family associations for new immigrants that came to the country in the larger cities. They didn't have family associations in the South. We did learn that. That was something that was more unique to the coast, the coasts. New York, San Francisco, LA.
Yeah, because really San Francisco and New York were the biggest Chinatowns. It really wasn't in between, other than you would have, well, of course, your family was there in Mississippi, and I know somewhere in North Carolina. So they kind of, as they branched out to different areas where they thought it would be a better life for them, is how they moved around.
Well, and one of the things that we did in our research that is not known very, very much is just like the Mississippi, and it's not just Mississippi, but the, Arkansas, Louisiana. I mean, just the whole southern region, there's other states. I mean, the whole Pacific Northwest, or even Colorado and Wyoming, and there were little Chinatowns that popped up all across the US because of the transcontinental railroad, and a lot of workers. But unfortunately, a lot of the Chinese were literally ran out of town, or houses were burned down, and so a lot of that history has been lost. So there were a lot more Chinatowns at one point in time.
So you actually talk about in the article in the Pasadena Weekly about the Los Angeles Chinese massacre in 1871, and the violent mobs trying to drive the Chinese out of Pasadena in 1885. Can you talk more about those? Or
those are some items, I mean, that the journalists had actually knew about, and I had learned a little bit about how I believe where our gold line runs through right now, on that same area is actually used to be the railroad, which the Chinese also helped build through Pasadena. And I believe historically here in Pasadena, in old Pasadena, there was a small Chinatown alley there. And I think there's a plaque still sitting on that alleyway.
In Old Town,
in Old Town.
Oh, in Old Town? Oh.
Yeah, so there was a small, I think there was a couple of, unfortunately, there was some lynchings here in Pasadena.
The one in LA was the bigger one.
But the LA one was the large one. It was like between 18 to 20 people, all at the same time. And it's just another unfortunate part of our history where a
And
lot of people don't know about.
and that was like near Alvera Street, right?
Right, right, near Alvera Street, where pretty
Well,
much where
yeah,
the Chinese American Museum is
right,
is
In
that's
now.
what
LA.
it is.
Hmm.
The museum is right near Alvera Street to do that.
Yeah.
So, well, your film just has so many emotional parts to it. What do you hope your impact of the film will be to everybody that sees it, other than their education about your family, other families, that increase knowledge, and how emotional it is for your father, Baldwin, to discover all of this?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly hope that what our film can do is normalize people's understanding and our conversations of what makes somebody American. I think our histories have been lost, and that's an unfortunate thing because the Chinese Exclusion Act did exactly what it was supposed to do. It excluded not only the people from coming over or even staying and being a part of this country, but it excluded our history. And unfortunately, what you kind of see today is that our community, the Asian API community, they tend to be looked at as foreigners rather than members that belong to this country. And so what we hope this film does is it normalizes people's understanding of who we are, let people understand that not just our family, but so many other stories from other API communities are part of the landscape of America and have contributed and love this country. I mean, that we're here for a reason, is because we want to be here. So for us to allow other people to understand that, I think is what we really want people to do.
Yeah, and I think, we really want to broaden the way American history is discussed to be more inclusive of the Asian American experience, and other communities of color that may have been underrepresented. And in our particular case, we're talking about the American South. We're talking about segregation. Chapters in American history we all learn about in school currently, and so we would like to just see those discussions just again broaden to be including that the Chinese and other Asians were also subject to segregation and some of that history of discrimination again that's been kind of erased. And a lot of times I liken this to like a family photo. Sometimes you look at a photo album and maybe you've got like corners like curled up or like folded over, and you've been looking at the photo album all these years and you've just seen it one way, and then all of a sudden you realize like, wait a second, those photo corners have been folded over. Like let's open that up. What else is on that photo? And then you realize there's been a couple of other family members that have been like hidden there. You're like, wait a second, they've been there the whole time. How come we didn't know about this? And you're like, okay, well we got to just like fold back the corner so they can see the whole picture. And that's really what this is, because I know sometimes people can feel threatened, like, oh, you're just diminishing another group's history, or you're trying to replace or cancel someone else's history. And that's not the goal with our film. The whole goal is just to say, like, we've been there the whole time. We've been in that family photo. It'd be nice to see the whole photo now, and hopefully everyone embraces that history as being part of it. It's not new history. It just because you didn't learn about it before doesn't mean it didn't happen. And especially for our daughter, that would make her sixth. Through the course of our film, we discover that Baldwin's now fifth generation in the United States, which makes our daughter sixth generation in the United States. And so that's pretty American. I mean, even I'm the first one born in my family. I mean, I hopefully will be still be treated as an American, or somebody that's been naturalized as a citizen, is a true American. And I think we want to change the way the conversations and people are treated in that sense, especially in our city of Pasadena, where we've actually been the victims of some racial insults in this very multicultural city that we thought was a safe place. But we want to change people's perceptions.
Well, I definitely hope you do, and I'm sure you will with this excellent film. It's something that definitely has to be done. And it's surprising to all of us that it took so long for some of this, because for your daughter to be the sixth generation is really amazing. And you think of all the other immigrants that came to this country, and some of them can't say sixth generation, so she's definitely an American for a long time. So obviously you hope that your audiences take away from this film that everybody is the same. You're all an Americans, and there isn't any difference. Do you hope other things, or are you going to do other documentaries that are going to further prove that everybody American.
Yeah. Well, and I do want to say that with us wanting to be embraced and seen as American, we also want to say that it's okay to also be proud of your heritage and to embrace your heritage, just like there are proud Italian Americans and Irish Americans. We hope that we're not saying like deny your, Asian heritage, but the fact is you can be both. Like you can be proud of your Asian heritage and yet be fully embraced as American. And we definitely have a couple things that we're working on. One of them is getting our film into schools and the education system. We're so excited that Sierra Madre, not too far from here, right? Like Sierra Madre Middle School just did a school-wide screening of our film for all our students and discussion. And we're working with a lot of different schools across the country so that we can have this history, again, more integrated into existing American history lessons. So if anybody wishes to join us in that effort, we'll put some links in the chat of how you might be able to bring our film into your schools.
Yeah, and then if you want to talk about additional history while she's putting that in the chat, in our film, Far East, Deep South, you all shared with us the history from my father's side of the family. And what we did, unfortunately, was neglect my mom and all that. So we did learn some things several months ago from my mom's side of the family, which we're going to hopefully try to uncover as well. But what we found was that we have a great grandfather who was actually in Denver, Colorado. And we found a couple of documents from Denver, Colorado from 1902. And one was a certificate of residence, so he was legally here. Apparently he was a transcontinental railroad worker. After the completion, he moved into Denver, Colorado, where there used to be a Chinatown, and unfortunately that is now gone as well. But we also found that he did the same thing that my great-grandfather tried to do in Mississippi from my father's side, which was going back to China to get married because he couldn't find a wife over here. There was, obviously there was laws here that prevented him from marrying outside his race. So he went back to China to get married, start a family, and hopefully bring his family back over to the US, back home here. Unfortunately, the Chinese Exclusion Act was still in effect at that time as well, and it did not allow him to come back. So the other document that we found was a letter to his lawyer, who was white, who was totally on his side trying to get him back in. But he said he was very apologetic, saying, I can't, I'm trying, you're legal, you should be able to come in, but this Chinese Exclusion Act thing and everything going on around it isn't allowing us to get you back into this country. So that's why my great-grandfather on my mom's side never made it back to the US, and my mom was actually born in Hong Kong. So we're trying to discover that side of the history now.
So we joke, it's like Far East Rocky Mountains might be our next project.
You're both very, very good researchers. Very, very good. And so this is a very important film and very important what you're doing for everyone. There are some comments.
Oh, yeah.
So let's get to those. A lot of people are wanted to say the film was excellent, and I could really relate being a child of immigrants. My father came from Trinidad in 1939 through Ellis Island and joined the army in order to become a citizen.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was a lot of, just exactly like in the Philippines, a lot of young men joined the American military, and then they were able to bring their families to the United States. And this lady's, she said that all my mother talked about was how the Chinese, Irish, and Jews were mistreated. So I was very well aware of all of this. So then another question is, do you know why your grandmother came back?
My great-grandmother came back. So my great-grandmother
was the bound feet.
She's the one with the bound feet.
So after, her husband and her son died in Mississippi, my grandfather and great-grandfather, she had bound feet, so she couldn't run a store by herself. So she sold the store off to the Dunn family and moved back to Hong Kong or China, that area, that region. And so she went back to China to basically be with her family and to, be with my father, because she knew that, she had a grandson in China and eventually in Hong Kong when they moved there. So she went back to be with family, and they did have stuff in the works to try to come back. It was always the plan to bring my father into the United States. Unfortunately, with my grandfather passing away early, that paperwork and on all those, it didn't happen. So it finally was able to happen through many, many years later, as you saw in the film, and that's when she was able to come back.
Yeah, I mean, I think the way your dad tells it, your great grandmother, in a sense, made a promise to your grandfather that at some point, somehow, she was going to bring him to the United States, even though she honestly, I don't think, wanted to come back because she just had really miserable memories, like living in the South, from my understanding. But because she made the promise to her son that to bring his dad over is why she kind of went out of her way, because she was much more comfortable back in China, but she made the sacrifice to bring his dad over.
So have you used Ancestry or other genealogical sites to discover your family history in America? Do you recommend other people to go through that?
Yeah, we started off with Ancestry, but then we also use Family Search, which is similar to Ancestry, as well as I think MyHeritage.
And your library, the Central Library has a subscription to Ancestry?
Yes, we do.
Yeah. So we highly recommend people
when the library is open.
When the library is reopened.
When you're able
I think
to
you can actually access it even when you're not in the library, right? Or something?
Right. It's one of those services you have to have a library card.
Yeah, so Emerald Dunn in our film, she's kind of like a local historian in that area right now. And so she did most of her research at the Memphis library through ancestry.com. So that's how she did a lot of the research, and she helped us find names and different documents on Ancestry, and those were the documents we used to go to the National Archives to try to get additional information.
Yeah, and if you are interested in more information of doing research for your own family, we actually are hosting a family history panel tomorrow with several rock stars of the genealogy world. We have someone from family and someone who used to be who worked at the National Archives. Marissa Louis Lee is going to be there as well. So it's a free workshop, virtual. If you're interested, I dropped the link in. I think everyone can see it. It's tomorrow at Tuesday, 6 p.m. Pacific. If you want to join us and plunge and learn about more resources. Because I even though it seems like we became accidental experts at this, there are people that know a lot more than we do.
Well, I think you know an awful lot. I really think you do, and everybody can see it here. It's Family History Panel Workshop, Tuesday, May the 25th at 6 p.m. Pacific time. And there is the email that you can click on and go to the event tomorrow at 6 o'clock. So how did they actually end up in Mississippi? I mean, think of all the different places that they could have. So he was a merchant, and that was a favorable place to go, or he had to also how did he get his items to sell in his store? Who would he have purchased those items from?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So specifically with Baldwin's great-grandfather, we discovered through the documents we found at the National Archives that his great-grandfather went from San Francisco down to Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and New Orleans, where I think he worked for a laundry for a little bit. And then he went up to Memphis, Tennessee, and then different cities in
Memphis was like a big hub where they were recruiting Chinese people for all different types of labor in the South. So that's probably the reason why he ended up going there, because he heard that that's where a lot of jobs might have been. Right.
And so with the merchant, he didn't start out as a merchant. He was working for other people, and he was working, in different stores, and I think learning the trade. He ended up in Pace, Mississippi, the small town you see in our film. Initially, again, these are all things we learned from the National Archives documents. He had a business partner, or maybe that person, somebody with the last name Wood, he had the business already, and maybe your great-grandfather came to work in. Eventually, they became partners, and your great-grandfather purchased the business because that store owner ended up going back to China and never to return, again to the United States.
And we don't know why.
Yeah, so we do know that that's kind of genesis specifically of how his great-grandfather came to own the grocery store in Pace, Mississippi, all because of the National Archives Chinese Exclusion Files.
Yeah.
Well, it's just amazing what research you can do. So what do you recommend people to do for their own family history? So should start with Ancestry.
I would say,
Start-
I mean, you could do Ancestry, but I would say something even easier, maybe easier, hopefully easier, is just to start talking with your family members. And I would say start talking to the oldest members first, and get as much information as you can from them, and just really convince them that you're interested in their story. And sometimes it takes multiple visits. It takes time for them to remember something that happened decades ago. They may not remember it the first time, but give it some other opportunities, ask it a different way, have different people ask it. We found that that was very valuable, especially like with my father. He would not tell me anything. So everything you saw in the film that has my father in an interview, it was because I got kicked out of the room. Actually, I got kicked out of the house. I think you sent me to the mall. So take your daughter to the mall. And
so, I mean, the key is to find out names, and not just people's names, but even names of businesses, names of cities, like anything that you can search. And I also dropped a link in the chat here. We have a few links on our website to some of the things that we discussed, here, National Archives website, etc., where just even searching newspapers, and you can search like a relative's names, and that can sometimes uncover a lot of information. Like we ended up researching, it didn't make it into our film, but we searched Baldwin's great grandfather's name, and we found an article about a lawsuit that he was involved in in Mississippi. Could find a place to work it in, but it was just very interesting. And we found some other names of different people, or obituaries, marriage license, death certificates. I mean, anything there might be a record. Those are all really great places to start.
Well, congratulations on your wonderful, wonderful film. It really tore at our heartstrings, very emotional, lots of wonderful detail, and the family relationships and what you've actually preserved for your daughter to have this film, and the relationship with her grandfather and the knowledge about her family is absolutely wonderful. So I thank you very much you've put some other things in there.
If people are interested in learning more about our film, they can go to our website, fareastdeepsouth.com, and we have a couple of other panels besides the one on family history coming up. And if you're on social media, feel free to follow us on social media. But certainly, if you go to our website, we're constantly, updating things and sending out newsletters about how we can get our film into more schools. And if you're with a university, our film is also available on Canopy. I can't remember if we mentioned that yet.
Yeah, a little bit.
You want to talk about that?
I mean, yeah, so Canopy with a K. I know the library is thinking about getting maybe some access in the future, but right now it's only available on Canopy for universities. So Larissa will put that link in there. Also, a slightly shorter version of the film is available through the end of the month through PBS. You could tell your friends about it, or you can go to the Pasadena Library and get the DVD, which has bonus stuff.
Bonus features, which is my director's commentary, and bonus scenes that are deleted scenes.
So the only place to see the deleted scenes is on the DVD that your library has.
So, yes.
So there's like 7 different scenes. You learn about Wong Kim Ark, which is an amazing history that we had to leave out, and his contributions to this country. And yeah.
But yeah, I should just say, you want to listen to me talk for
listen
like
to her
another
talk for
hour
15
plus
minutes.
about the film. No, the deleted scenes are really cool, and yes, if you do want more insights into the making of the film and behind the scenes stuff, my director's commentary is on there.
Well, I think absolutely we would want to, and I think we're very fortunate that you've given 5 DVDs to the Pasadena Library to have in our system. So I want to encourage everyone to go to our catalog, put your hold on it, and check them out. And also to attend all of these other fabulous programs. The research and the knowledge that you can gain from this is just absolutely amazing. So I thank you very, very much for reaching out to us. Now, can people personally buy Finding Cleveland, your first film? Is that?
Oh, yes.
They actually can. That's a 14-minute short film, and that is available through our website, which
Yeah, we
I
should can drop
will
that link in there
put
as
that in
well.
there
But yes, we
or
do have
store.
DVDs available for Finding Cleveland, and that is cool too because we have bonus scenes in there too with our music. So you get to watch some pretty cool music videos as well, um, as see the film that started it all, Finding Cleveland. Of course, Finding Cleveland is embedded naturally and
The
retold a little bit.
story,
The
yeah.
story of Finding Cleveland is embedded in Far East Deep South. But if you just want to join us on that very first day of adventure, definitely highly recommend that you pick up a copy of that as well.
Yeah, because that first day of adventure led to Far East Deep South.
Yes.
It sure did.
Where you were going to. So I'm just sure that your research is going to uncover lots of other things that you haven't even thought of yet. Or will you help other families to research their families that they don't know about? Have other families approached you to assist them?
We've had some people just ask us for advice, and that's why we started hosting some of these family
panels
history panels
and the resource page
and the resources, because we started getting asked that a lot. But maybe down the line we'll do some other things. I mean, we've had people request us to do certain documentaries or suggest certain documentary subjects on a families, and we said, if you are able to get us the budget, we can make a documentary about that family member.
I think on a more realistic goal for our film is that, like, we hope that our film inspires people to research their own stories, because I mean, we knew nothing and all of a sudden we found all this stuff out. It just happens to that, we had the desire to make a film out of it, and we've worked in entertainment for so long, so we kind of had some of the tools and we could figure out the rest of the tools. But you don't need to make a documentary out of it. I hope that what our film does is it shows that we are all connected in so many different ways, and it doesn't matter how different we look, or where our generational gaps may be, or where we may really come from or did not come from. There's unfortunately, there's a lot of struggles that could unite us, but there's a lot of successes and accomplishments that can unite us as well. And I think these stories are important for us to understand that history.
Yeah, and I want to thank Wendy for sending us her comments, and you mentioned it early before, where there are connections between communities, and in our case, historically it wasn't just the Chinese and the African American community in the South, but you see the labor movement around the globe, coming from China, coming from Africa, coming from India, that brought people to the Caribbean, brought people to South America, and all parts of the world, so that we're all much more interconnected than we realize. And so that's certainly our hope, is that we can foster stronger relationships between communities.
Well, you have definitely fostered a lot of connections and a lot of awareness through your wonderful film, Far East Deep South. And I thank you so much for presenting it as part of Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month for the Pasadena Public Library. Encourage everyone, please, to go to our catalog, reserve one of those wonderful DVDs, and see the extra hour of information that Larissa has there. So thank you all so much for attending today's program. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great night.
Bye-bye. Thank you so much.
See you when it reopens.
Yes, we will. We'll be back. But remember, you can go to one of our branches. We're still open.
Yes,
That's right.
just not the central, but yeah, all the other ones are.
Yes, you can go to, and we're very fortunate that we have all of these other sites that you're able to go to. So please come to your favorite branch, and we'll see you there. Thank you. Good night, everybody. Bye-bye.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.